Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel back to a morning routine so old, so surprisingly normal for its time, it might make you question your own breakfast choices. Imagine this. You wake up not to coffee, not to tea, but to the gentle clink of a wooden mug being placed beside your straw-stuffed pillow. Your mother or maybe a monk just poured you a fresh cup of ale. Not to get drunk, mind you. This is your daily wake-up call. Welcome to the medieval breakfast beer tradition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub your eyes. It's early, maybe just after dawn. Outside, mist curls low over muddy lanes, and the sharp scent of damp hay lingers in the air. You sit up slowly, wrapped in linen sheets that are probably coarser than you'd like. Across the room, someone's already up poking at the hearth, coaxing the first flames of the day. Breakfast is being prepared, but there's no smell of frying eggs, no coffee pot whistling. Just the familiar yeasty temps of fresh ale warming by the fire. You shuffle across the wooden floor, careful not to trip over the dogs still snoring in the corner. At the table sits your father, perhaps a blacksmith, a baker, or a farmer, already sipping quietly from his mug. He nods to you. No words, just a gesture. Drink up, and you do. The first sip is warm, a little sour, surprisingly light. The ale is thick, like cloudy soup, but there's no fizz, no bite. It's not intoxicating. It's breakfast, and you're not alone. Across villages, towns, and even monasteries, millions of people are greeting the day just like you are, with a mug of beer. This isn't some rebellious teenage habit, or a festival gone rogue. This is the norm. It's so normal, in fact, that to refuse ale might seem suspicious, like refusing bread or salt. People might raise eyebrows. Are you ill? Are you trying to fast like a saint? Even children are given small cups with their porridge. Not to be indulgent, but to be safe. Because here's the thing. Water, you don't trust it. You've seen what happens when someone drinks straight from the stream after a storm. Sickness, fever, sometimes worse. The well's cleaner, but not foolproof. Water that sits becomes questionable. But ale, ale has been boiled, fermented, brewed with herbs, sometimes spices. It's safe, and in the morning, it's warm. The process of making this ale is a quiet ritual in itself. Grain is soaked, malted, then boiled in large cauldrons that bubble like potion pots. Hops aren't widely used yet, that comes later. So the brew is flavored with groot, a mix of herbs like yarrow, bog, myrtle, or rosemary. Each household has its own recipe, passed from grandmother to granddaughter, like sacred knowledge. You take another sip, and the warmth spreads. It settles low in your stomach. Not enough to make you dizzy unless you down 5 mugs, but just enough to smooth the edges of a cold morning. Outside, someone calls. The geese are loose again, and the day has officially begun. In some homes, the ale is poured from a tall, slightly cracked, earthen jug. In others, it's a wooden cask spouted directly into a mug. The cup might be carved from horn, wood, or fired clay. What it's not made of, glass. Too rare, too expensive. Ale is for everyone, not for show. Breakfast itself is simple. A slice of rye bread, maybe a smear of soft cheese or butter, if you're lucky. But the ale, that's the heart of the meal. It's what gives the body strength, according to your grandmother. It keeps your blood warm, your head clear. Better than cold well water, she says, wiping her hands on her apron. And you believe her? Even the church, often strict about indulgence, turns a blind eye to this morning drink. Some abbeys even brew their own, and if you're a novice monk, you're likely allowed a daily allowance, sometimes up to a gallon divided throughout the day. It's measured not in sin, but in health. What strikes you, as you watch the room stir to life, is how unremarkable it all feels. No one here sees beer as strange. It's not a treat. It's not rebellious. It's just part of the rhythm, like stretching after sleep, or pulling on your cloak before heading out. The ale is simply there. And there's something soothing about that. Something steady. In a world where winters are long, illness is frequent, and food sometimes scarce, the warm ale at breakfast is a comfort. A ritual, a habit passed down through generations, not because it was fashionable, but because it worked. So you finish your mug, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and step out into the day. You take another sip this time, slower, more thoughtful. The mug's wooden rim presses against your lips, familiar now, and your brain quietly registers something unusual for the modern mind. This is not about fun. This isn't celebratory. No one is clapping your back and yelling cheers. There's no bard playing the lute in the background. The ale in your cup is functional. It's fuel, not fireworks. You glance around the room. Your older brother is tying his boots, a bit of dried mud still clinging from yesterday's field work. He downs his drink in 2 gulps and heads for the door without a word. You think about how, in another world, this could have been coffee, but in this one, coffee hasn't arrived yet. Neither has tea. Those are exotic luxuries, whispered about by traders and scholars. The average villager in 14th century England or France, or Flanders doesn't dream of caffeine. They rely on what they can make. And what they can make is beer, except it's not quite the beer you're picturing. Not the golden, bubbly lager from the pub down the road. Medieval ale is cloudy, earthy, unfiltered. It's often weaker in alcohol, especially the batches brewed for daily consumption, called small beer. Sometimes it's so light that even toddlers sip from their tiny cups at breakfast. And yes, that really happened. Historians have debated it for years, but the evidence keeps showing up in household accounts, monastery ledgers, and even court records. So why not just boil water, you wonder? Wouldn't that be simpler? Technically, yes. But boiling water for a single cup doesn't solve the long-term problem. Brewed ale, on the other hand, stores better. It's boiled during the brewing process, making it safer from the start. Add fermentation and herbs, both slightly antimicrobial, and you get a drink that resists spoilage for days or even weeks. In a world without refrigerators or bottled water, that's magic. Even in towns, where water might come from a fountain or a shared well, people are cautious. There are too many stories. The neighbor's wife who drank from the stagnant trough. The child who fell ill after the spring flood. Water is a risk. Ale, paradoxically, is the safe choice. You watch your grandmother ladle the last bit of yeasty foam from a wooden bucket into her own mug. She hums a tune, something you've heard since childhood, wordless and worn down like a river stone. Her hands are steady. She's done this for 50 years, maybe more. You ask her once, as a child, why she drinks beer every morning. She just smiles and says, "It keeps the ghosts away." You weren't sure what that meant at the time. Now you think maybe it just meant the cold, the ache in the joints, the hollow fear of sickness, because for all its rustic charm, your world is dangerous. A single wound can fester, a single cough can spread, and every little advantage counts, including what you drink. In fact, beer isn't just tolerated, it's regulated. In many towns, brewing is an official trade. Alewives, mostly women, keep strict logs of their batches. The town ale taster comes by to sample their product and check quality. If it's too weak or too sour. Fines if it's too strong. Even more fines. Because strength means alcohol, and alcohol means distraction. And society needs its workers sober or, at least, functional. There's even an ale pole, a long stick, hung with a small cloth or bush, mounted outside a house to let neighbors know a new batch is ready. You remember the thrill of seeing one as a child. the smell of fresh mash wafting out the door, the clatter of coins and clay mugs inside. And here's the twist. This culture of beer isn't born out of hedonism. It's built on practicality. It's about public health. In a time before germ theory, people still noticed patterns. Bad water, bad belly, good ale, steady days. That's all the science they needed. As you finish your morning ale, you think about how odd this all sounds to someone centuries ahead. Beer for breakfast. Children sipping from mugs. Grandmas humming into foam. But in your world, this is common sense. The kind passed down not in books, but in lived habits. And those habits, however curious they seem now, kept generations alive. So no, this isn't a party drink. Not today. Not in the morning. It's something simpler, something softer. A quiet ally in a noisy, unpredictable world. You step outside with your empty cup, the taste of yeasty warmth still lingering on your tongue. The sky is pale and heavy with mist. Your fingers tuck into your sleeves instinctively. It's that kind of cold that bites slow, like it's thinking about it first. You walk the dirt path toward the town square, passing wagons creaking under sacks of barley, oxen yawning steam into the air, and then you smell it, that warm, sour, sweet smell, like wet bread and roasted grains. You follow your nose past the bakery and toward the stone wall of the abbey. You wouldn't expect it, but the finest beer in town doesn't come from the pub. It comes from behind these cloistered walls, brewed not by burly tavern keepers, but by nuns. That's right, veiled women in spotless habits, hands folded in prayer. Were some of the most skilled brewers in medieval Europe. You slip through the garden gate like you've done a dozen times before. Herbs line the path: sage, rue, chamomile. There's a faint buzzing of bees from the hives near the hedgerow. But the real treasure lies further in. Past the chapel and the laundry yard, you reach the brewery. The building is small, neat, and humming with quiet purpose. Inside, the scent hits you again, stronger now. Malted barley soaking in great wooden vats, copper kettles steaming as firewood crackles beneath dots. Sister Agnes waves at you without missing a beat. She's stirring a mash tun with a paddle taller than she is, sleeves rolled to the elbow, face flushed from the heat. You've heard her say, brewing is just like prayer, patient, rhythmic, and always done in silence. Except for her humming. Of course, she always hums. You peek into the storeroom. Sacks of grain from nearby fields are stacked neatly alongside earthen jugs of hops and herbs. Not every ale uses hops, not yet, but the nuns here are experimental. They know bitter herbs can act like natural preservatives. Some of them even believe they ward off spirits. Maybe they do. The abbey's beer isn't just for personal use. It's part of the monastery's economy. They sell it to travelers, townsfolk, and even nearby nobles. And here's the surprising part. Their brewing books are more detailed than anything you've seen in town. Temperature notes, ingredient proportions, fermentation times written in crisp Latin, bound in soft leather. No scribbles, no guesses. Just quiet mastery. You think about how strange it must seem to modern eyes. Nuns, usually imagined cloistered in solemn prayer, working as beverage artisans. But this wasn't odd back then. Monasteries were centers of science, agriculture, and yes, alcohol. Brewing was part of their duty, both for self-sufficiency and for hospitality, because in a world where travelers couldn't trust roadside water, monasteries became sanctuaries. And sanctuary tastes better with beer. Sister Beatrice passes by, carrying a tray of sample mugs. She offers you one, a small cup of something darker, richer than the breakfast ale you had earlier. You sip, notes of smoke and honey, maybe rosemary. You raise an eyebrow, she winks. Today's feast day, she says. We added a little miracle. The nuns never advertise their recipes. They just let the beer speak for itself. In fact, some people believe their batches are blessed. There's an old tale about a sickly knight who could keep down nothing but their beer, and he rose from his bed 3 days later like nothing had ever happened. It was the hops, Sister Agnes jokes. Or maybe just our cooking fire finally burned the devil out. Historians, naturally, are still debating how widespread non-brewed beer really was. Most of the written records come from larger monasteries, but oral tradition and archaeological digs point toward a broader trend. Clay jugs stamped with abbey seals, brewing tools found in nunneries, a surprising number of medieval songs praising Lady Ale. The evidence is scattered, but it adds up like foam rising slowly in a cup. You sit on a low bench as steam curls through the open rafters. The bells begin to chime the morning hour, and the sisters fold their brewing tools away, ready to head to chapel. You finish your cup and set it on the ledge. For a brief moment, you feel the stillness settle. The kind of peace that comes from repetition, from care, from making something with your hands again and again until it sings. Beer, it turns out, isn't just about thirst. It's about trust. Trusting the grain, the water, the heat and the people who turn it into something safe, even sacred. And here, behind stone walls and veils, the most unlikely brewers remind you that good things can come from quiet places. Asterisk. You head back into town just as the morning mist begins to lift. The streets are a little livelier, now vendors setting out apples and pickled onions, housewives chatting over open windows, dogs barking at carts wobbling by. You pass the schoolhouse, a small timber-framed building near the churchyard, and catch sight of something that would probably give a modern parent a mild heart attack. A row of children sipping from wooden mugs. No, they're not up to mischief. No one's sneaking a taste of something they shouldn't. This is perfectly normal. In fact, it's encouraged. Welcome to the curious world of small beer, a low-alcohol brew once consumed by people of all ages, including schoolchildren. Not just tolerated, but poured freely with breakfast. Because in many parts of pre-modern Europe, especially in the Middle Ages and early modern period, water couldn't be trusted. You see, while today's tap water is filtered, chlorinated, and piped to our homes in sterile tubes, medieval water came from rivers, wells, and rain barrel sources often shared with livestock, laundry, and the occasional decomposing something. In short, a gamble. Boiling helped, sure, but brewing made it deliciously safe. So what was in these kid-friendly brews? Small beer was made from the second or third runnings of the grain mash, that is, the leftover liquid after the stronger stuff had already been extracted for adult ales. The result? A beverage with 0.5 to 2% alcohol, just enough to kill bacteria but not enough to cause stumbling or slurring. You'd get your hydration, your calories, and your peace of mind in a single mug. You peer through the open window and watch the schoolmaster distribute mugs like a solemn bartender. No one is giggling. This is just part of the routine. Bread, cheese, a bit of pottage and beer. You remember stories from your own childhood, passed down from your grandmother? When I was your age, we had beer before grammar. Across Europe, variations of small beer went by different names. In Germany, they had shank beer. In England, small ale. In France, petite beer. But the idea was the same. Lightly fermented, quickly brewed, and consumed daily. Not as a treat, but as a necessity. Water was dangerous. Beer was reliable. You spot a younger child holding a mug with both hands, eyes still heavy with sleep, steam curling up from the warm beverage. His sister nudges him, and he slurps dutifully. Somewhere, far in the future, a nutritionist probably shudders. But this wasn't about indulgence. It was about survival. Small beer offered protein, carbohydrates, and hydration. It gave energy for chores, focus for schoolwork, and in some cases, warmth on a cold morning. Think of it less like beer and more like liquid breakfast. Some parents even brewed their own small beer at home. It was part of the household rhythm, like baking bread or curing meat. In fact, many recipes were passed down through generations, flavored with herbs, and adjusted for taste. One family's small beer might include chamomile, and others might lean into oats or honey. It wasn't just practical, it was personal. Modern historians still argue over just how widespread this practice was. Some point to regional differences, suggesting that not all children drank beer, or that milk and thin porridge were more common in some households. But archaeological finds, tiny mugs, brewing tools and domestic sites, even school ledgers, noting daily rations, suggest that, in many places, this was no exception. It was Tuesday. You wonder what it would feel like to start your day with a mug of warm barley instead of coffee. Slower, perhaps, smoother, and in some odd way, deeply comforting. You take a mental note. Find a small beer recipe. One of the children at the window waves at you, then turns back to his lesson. A chalkboard scrawled with Latin verbs. A teacher humming under his breath. The sound of slurping, not disruptive, not strange, just part of learning. In a world where danger could lurk in a sip of water, beer was a gentle, reliable shield, even for the smallest hands. You take a seat on a low stone wall near the village green, resting your legs as the morning sun creeps higher through a haze of chimney smoke and mist. Somewhere nearby, someone is cracking grain. The sound is dull and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, in a stone bowl. It reminds you of what this whole beer for breakfast business is really built on. Humble, glorious grain, not hops, not yeast, not even water. At the center of every brew is the grain, and, in the medieval world, it was nothing short of life itself. Back then, most people didn't count calories or think in terms of macros, but they instinctively knew what modern nutritionists have since confirmed, that grains, especially malted barley, oats, and sometimes rye, offered a nutritional powerhouse. When you drank small beer, you weren't just rehydrating after a long night. You were sipping a solution of carbohydrates, proteins, B vitamins, and trace minerals. A kind of medieval protein shake, minus the blender. The magic began with malting. Barley was soaked in water, allowed to germinate slightly, then dried to halt the process. This unlocked sugars in the grain, which not only fed the yeast during fermentation but also made the drink sweet, filling, and nourishing. And while hops would later become a common additive for preservation and flavor, early small beers often skipped them entirely, letting the malt speak for itself. The result? A thick, soupy, porridge-like texture, in some cases less like today's beverages, and more like drinking a light cereal broth. You imagine holding a warm mug between your hands. No carbonation, no fizz, no head. Just a gently fermented grain. Tea, thick enough to coat your tongue, thin enough to swallow easily. Somewhere between liquid bread and boiled granola. Children, adults, workers, scholars, everyone needed energy. And with meat often expensive, and fruits seasonal, beer made from grains became the most reliable source of daily calories for the average person. A single pint of small beer could contain hundreds of calories, not from sugar, but from the grain itself, slow-burning fuel to keep you planting, plowing, weaving, or writing. Modern experts often liken it to a medieval smoothie, only ... browner, and much less photogenic, of course. Grains weren't just for beer. You'd find them in bread, pottage, porridge. But beer gave them new life. A way to preserve surplus, reduce waste, and even elevate scraps into something communal and comforting. You think about the monks again, those patient scribes, in cold, stone rooms. What kept their hands from shaking as they inked 1,000 curves in Latin? Probably not divine inspiration alone. Probably, ... the warm, slow burn of barley in their bellies. Even noble households drank small beer regularly, though theirs might have come with a few spices or dried fruit mixed in. For the poor, beer could be the only way to get a decent amount of nutrition in a single sitting. And the irony. In today's world, where beer is seen as a guilty pleasure, often demonized for its calories, in the past it was celebrated because of them. You glance down at your own breakfast or bit of toast. Some jam, maybe coffee cooling beside you. It feels ... suspiciously flimsy now. You picture trading it for a mug of thick, malty warmth, filled with quiet energy and soft flavor. No. They didn't have vitamin labels in the 14th century, but they had instincts. They knew when something gave strength, when it softened the hunger and steadied the hands. You hear the grain cracking start up again, echoing like soft drumbeats through the valley. Somewhere, barley is being transformed slowly, patiently into another day's quiet strength. And in that way, small beer wasn't just survival. It was ritual. It was rhythm. It was the grain reborn. Asterisk as the village green empties out, and the scent of morning bread fades into the damp breeze. You find yourself in a shaded corner near a low wooden bench, eyeing two clay mugs. One is slightly darker, with a richer smell, the other lighter, a bit cloudier. A local brewer catches your glance and grins, lifting both mugs and asking ale or beer. You hesitate. Isn't that the same thing? Apparently not. And in medieval Europe, this distinction mattered a lot. Let's break it down gently. In the early days of brewings, before the 15th century, the word beer wasn't even common in England. What you'd get if you asked for something fermented was most likely ale, and ale, classically, had no hops. Yes, no hops. Those bitter little green flowers you now associate with every craft IPA were not always a part of the plan. In fact, for a long time, they were seen as unnecessary, or worse, un-English. Ale was a much simpler creature, just water, malted grains, and yeast, even if they didn't know the word yeast yet. It was usually cloudy, slightly sweet, and low in alcohol. Perfect for breakfast. It went down smooth, gave you strength, and didn't punch you in the face before you'd finished your chores. But beerio, beerhead, something more, hops. Hops changed everything. First imported from Flanders and the Low Countries, hops were initially controversial. They added a distinct bitterness, and more importantly, they acted as a preservative. Beer lasted longer, traveled farther, tasted ... sharper. You glance at the two mugs again. The ale is frothy, comforting, like warm bread in a cup. The beer, it has a little bite, a slight herbal temps, like someone dropped in a few wildflowers, just to stir things up. In towns and cities where storage and shipping were important, beer began to gain ground. Monasteries and large-scale brewers appreciated its longevity. Ale, on the other hand, remained the go-to for quick, local consumption. It didn't last long, sometimes just a day or two, but that was fine. You brewed it, you drank it, and you made more. Eventually, both styles existed side by side. People chose depending on their mood, their income, or their tolerance for bitterness. Some brewers even sold both under the same roof, letting customers sip and compare. For a time, in fact, there was a legal distinction. In 15th century England, brewers had to register as either ale brewers or beer brewers. The lines eventually blurred, but the fact that they existed tells you everything you need to know about how seriously people took their drinks. You picture yourself in a smoky tavern, asking for a pint. The innkeeper squints, nods slowly, and says, "Ale, is it? Or beer?" You choose ale. He pours it warm, heavy, and sweet. You sip, and it tastes like barley tea that remembered its dreams. Later, maybe after dusk, you come back. You're tired. You want something sturdier. This time you choose beer. It's darker, colder, a bit more bracing. It's not better, it's just different. That's the real takeaway. Ale and beer weren't rivals. They were cousins. Morning and evening. Candlelight and firelight. Softness and bite. So the next time you hear someone say, "It's just beer," maybe remember that for centuries, that meant two very different things. One warmed your hands before sunrise. The other saw you through the dusk. And in the world of medieval brewing, Even small differences left big footprints. The sun has now fully risen, casting a warm honey glow over the village rooftops. Chickens cluck in corners, the blacksmith hammers away with a gentle rhythm, and the baker is pulling his third round of loaves from the oven. You find yourself drawn toward a stone bench near the market square, where a group of women in woolen shawls are already deep in conversation. In their hands, mugs of small beer. Of course, it's not just hydration, it's ritual. In the medieval morning, beer wasn't something you rushed through. It was a moment, just like how people today might linger over their coffee, half-heartedly scrolling through their phones. These villagers would stand or sit in loose clusters by the market well, near the bread stall, outside the churchyard, gate, and talk. And oh, they could talk. One woman complains about the new tax on chicken coops. Another rolls her eyes and mutters something about her cousin's fourth failed engagement. Someone always knows who's pregnant, who's lying about being pregnant, and who's been sneaking off with the cooper's apprentice. The small beer keeps the tone light. It lowers defenses just enough to let a laugh out. You'll notice how no one ever drinks it alone. Even in the kitchen, even before chores begin, it's shared. A mug passed around between sisters, a husband and wife clinking clay cups before he heads to the fields, apprentices sipping beside their masters while discussing the day's work. And then there's the market. Gossip hub more powerful than any court, a dozen voices overlapping, weaving tales of marriage prospects, bread prices, and the mysterious stranger who asked too many questions about sheep. One woman swears she saw him drink his morning beer cold. Like a heretic, she whispers. You chuckle. Maybe it's the warmth of the drink, or the familiarity of the scene. It all feels timeless, because at its heart, beer was a social glue. It offered a reason to pause, a reason to gather, a reason to open your mouth and say what you really thought about the Lord's new wife's hat. Even children mimicked this rhythm, sitting near their mothers, sipping smaller mugs, ears wide open as they absorbed the world, not just its stories, but the cadence of how people shared them. The blacksmith's wife shows up with a jug. She pours for everyone, a toast to the harvest, a muttered blessing to keep the cows healthy, a joke about Father Brennan's surprisingly strong ale batch last Lent. And it's only 9 a.m. You start to understand why beer o'clock wasn't a joke, it was a schedule. Some historians even argue that these morning gatherings served as a kind of unofficial town hall. News was exchanged, disputes aired, warnings passed along. Who needs parchment notices when you have a dozen women trading facts over warm ale? In this moment, sitting among them, you realize that beer wasn't just something people consumed. It was something they shared. A vessel for community, trust, routine. So next time someone calls your slow morning coffee a lazy habit, just smile and say, actually, I'm participating in a centuries-old tradition of fermented camaraderie. And raise your mug to the gossip, the laughter, and the many sips that built a village. Asterisk, the laughter of the market fades behind you as you make your way up a gentle hill, toward the quiet silhouette of a stone monastery. Birds chatter in the eaves. Wind rustles the herb garden that lines the graveled path. At the gate, a brown-robed monk greets you with a nod and beckons you inside, not with words, but with a gesture that seems to say, you're ready. You step into the dim hallway, stone walls cool to the touch, and follow the monk through a series of arched corridors until you reach a small scriptorium. Rows of shelves hold scrolls and bound manuscripts, and there, on a low wooden table, lies an open book written in neat, looping Latin script, illuminated with tiny barley sheaves and golden hops. This is no ordinary prayer book. It's the brewing manual. Monasteries were not just houses of worship. They were centers of knowledge, medicine, agriculture, and, yes, beer. The monks brewed for sustenance, for hospitality, and, let's be honest, for the sheer quiet joy of a well-balanced pint. You sit beside the monk as he slowly copies a recipe into a fresh vellum page. He writes with a goose quill, dipping it into walnut ink with the same solemnity as he might bless a chalice. His hands are steady, his pace unhurried. Every letter matters. Every space between words is purposeful. The recipe reads like a whispered meditation. Soak the barley overnight beneath the waning moon. Dry it near the hearth until it crackles. Mash gently, whispering Psalms 34. Stir clockwise for strength. Yes, really, clockwise. You glance at him, wondering if this is metaphor or actual instruction. He smiles, says nothing, continues writing. The monks treated brewing as a form of devotion, a rhythm of hands and heat, silence and steam. Each batch was made not just with ingredients, but with intention. They grew their own herb zero, sweet gale, horehound 2 flavor ales, long before hops became standard. Some even believed certain additions aided digestion or warded off melancholy. You're allowed to peek into the brewery, a low, vaulted room filled with the sweet, earthy aroma of malt. Copper kettles bubble quietly. Steam drifts upward like incense. A few monks tend the fire, stir the mash, or clean the barrels, all in gentle silence. It feels like a living clock. Every motion has been repeated 1,000 times, passed down through whispered instruction and careful observation. There is no hurry, no panic, only patience, and it strikes you. In a world full of noise, brewing was their way of listening. Back at the scriptorium, the monk finishes the final line of his copied recipe and signs it not with a name, but with a symbol, a stylized barley stalk, circled by stars. He looks at you, presses the manuscript closed with a wooden weight, and says, "Ale is a prayer that feeds the body." You don't know if he means it literally, but you nod. Because here, in this space of parchment and steam, brewing truly does feel like prayer. And maybe, just maybe, your next drink will carry a little more reverence. The monastery bell rings in the distance, 3 solemn chimes echoing across the morning mist. It's not just a call to prayer, it's also breakfast time. You follow the scent of warm barley down a narrow corridor, and soon find yourself in the refectory, a long stone room with wooden benches and trestle tables. Candles flicker in the alcoves. A few monks are already seated, their hoods lowered, hands wrapped around steaming clay mugs. The air smells of roasted grain and something slightly sweet, maybe honey, maybe a hint of herbs. But what's striking isn't just the smell, it's the silence. No one speaks. You sit. A mug is set before you. The monk who places it down nods once, then moves on. You take a sip. It's not strong, barely alcoholic at all, but it's warm, rich, and comforting, like liquid bread. You close your eyes, letting the flavor settle on your tongue. Your body, groggy just moments ago, begins to wake, and only then do the monks rise and file quietly toward the chapel. Yes, before they open the Bible, before they chant psalms or kneel before relics. They drink. Beer comes before the Bible. It sounds sacrilegious to a modern ear, but to them, it wasn't just acceptable, it was necessary. Because prayer requires focus, and focus requires nourishment. In fact, medieval monastic life was full of such practical contradictions. You were expected to deny the body's pleasures, yet maintain its strength. To rise early and labor hard, yet keep your spirit light, and small beer barely fermented, rich in calories, vitamins, and warmth became a quiet companion in that balancing act. Some abbeys even had rules about it. 1 cup before lauds, 1 more after tears, no beer after none. It was structured, ritualized, like liturgy in liquid form. You glance around the table again. No one rushes, no one gulps. They sip slowly, like they're absorbing not just a beverage, but something older, an inheritance. Outside the refectory window, the sun has begun to warm the stone sill. Bees buzz in the herb garden. A cat stretches across a bench. And somewhere, faintly, you hear a choir begin to chant. You're not quite sure if you've just had breakfast or a kind of communion, but in this moment, mug in hand, everything feels in harmony, body, mind, and something gently divine. And that is not a bad way to start the day. The sun hasn't even crested the horizon, yet your day has already begun. You're pulling on a wool tunic, rough and slightly damp from yesterday's sweat, and lacing up your boots with fingers still stiff from sleep. The rooster's crow echoes over the damp fields. A cold breeze snakes through the cracks in the cottage door. Today is going to be long. 12 hours in the field, plowing, planting, hauling, sweating, and you haven't even had breakfast yet. But before you grab your sickle, you grab something else. A wooden cup, still warm from the hearth. It's ale. Light, cloudy, a little sour, but it's what keeps you upright. This isn't a drink of indulgence. It's fuel, it's hydration, it's calories in liquid form. And in a time when clean water was a gamble and mead was for the rich, this is what a working person drank. This is medieval Red Bull. The grains barley, oats, sometimes rye were soaked, boiled, and barely fermented. The result? A beverage rich in carbohydrates, vitamin B, and just enough alcohol to sterilize, not intoxicate. And it was common. So common that even children would have their own small mugs. So common that you didn't think of it as beer. You thought of it as bread in a cup. You finished the mug in 3 slow gulps, feeling the warmth spread to your chest. Your stomach, previously hollow, stops growling. Your limbs, stiff with cold, begin to loosen. Now, you're ready to pick up your tools. Out in the fields, the day unfolds like a relentless tide. The oxen snort and pull. The soil clumps under your boots. Your shoulders ache. The sun climbs slowly, mercilessly. And then, a pause. A break under the shade of a crabapple tree. Someone passes you a juggy more ale. Slightly different this time. Maybe brewed with a handful of herbs for flavor, or nettle leaves for vigor. You're not sure. You just know it's cool. And it tastes better than water. And here's a curious thing. Medieval peasants drank more ale per day than we drink coffee. Some estimates say up to 10 pints. But that doesn't mean they were stumbling around the fields. Because, again, it was small beer, low alcohol. High nutrition. Some historians believe a 14th century farm worker got almost a quarter of their daily calories from beer alone. Others argue it was more. There's still debate, as always. What's not debated is this. Without beer, most field hands would have collapsed before noon. You push the plow forward again. The earth yields. Slowly, steadily. Sweat runs down your temple. Your arms burn. But you feel present, not euphoric, not drunk, just ready, sustained, alive. The kind of alive that only comes when your body is fed just enough. When the air smells like soil, and when the only sound is the rhythmic creak of the yoke and the crunch of your boots in FURROWS. And at the end of the day, when your muscles finally give out and you collapse onto a hay-stuffed mattress, you know what tomorrow will begin with. Not prayer, not porridge, but a humble mug of early morning beer. Asterisk. You wipe the dirt from your hands with a rough cloth and sit beside the wooden table in the cottage. Across from you, your neighbor is complaining again, this time about his youngest child getting sick. You nod sympathetically, but in truth, you're not surprised. He'd let the boy drink straight water from the well, and in this village, that's asking for trouble. See, in your world, most water isn't just water. It's an invitation to parasites, to dysentery, to a week of fevers followed by either recovery or a funeral. There's no municipal treatment, no boiling notices, no plastic bottles shipped from across the sea. There's just the river, the well, or the questionable bucket someone left out in the rain. And what about milk? You might think, That would be a safer bet. But deer milk spoils. Quickly, sometimes within hours. In summer, it's practically a gamble, unless you had a cow yourself and milked her at dawn. Chances are, the milk you bought from someone else had already begun its gentle transformation into something less charming. No refrigeration, no pasteurization, just lukewarm optimism. So what's the one liquid everyone could count on? You guessed it, beer. And not just because people liked beer, but because beer could be trusted. The brewing process, boiling the mash, fermenting the liquid, naturally sterilized it. The low alcohol wasn't enough to intoxicate, but it was enough to keep bacteria at bay. It was brewed in batches, kept in barrels, and consumed throughout the day. And unlike milk or water, it didn't go off nearly as fast. Even the monks, those ancient wellness influencers, wrote about beer's digestive virtues. Some believed it was good for the humors. Others believed it kept melancholy away. Children drank it. Pregnant women drank it. Elders drank it. Beer was the great equalizer. Not a party drink, not a luxury, a necessity. There's a reason. Records from 14th century England show farm workers getting a daily allowance of ale as part of their wages. Not cash, not even bread. Ale. Some manor lords ensured their staff had morning and evening rations. Not out of kindness, though. That's how they'd phrase it, but because they knew sick workers don't till the fields, but hydrated, nourished, microbe-resistant workers. That's an efficient estate. Historians have long debated just how clean the beer really was. Was it consistent? Did it truly kill all bacteria? Maybe not. But compared to stagnant pond water or tepid goat milk, it was paradise. So there you are now, lifting your cup once more. It's not celebration, it's survival. And in that small, choosing beer over milk, you've made the safer, smarter choice of your century. No cheers needed. Just a nod of recognition to the quiet genius of fermented grains. Asterisk, you sit on a short stone wall, legs swinging slightly as the village begins to stir around you. Somewhere, a rooster is late for his morning call, and you can already hear the creak of carts and the chatter of neighbors preparing for market day. You stretch, yawn, and lift your wooden mug to your lips. It's not coffee, it's not tea, it's ale. Again, but here's the surprising thing. Your head is perfectly clear. You slept well, you feel light, and despite the 3 mugs of beer you had yesterday, plus a bit more, while shelling peas with your cousin, you're not feeling the least bit hungover. It's strange, not for your time, because the beer you're drinking and the beer most medieval folks relied on for hydration, calories, and comfort wasn't meant to get you drunk. It was small beer. Very small. Let's take a closer look. The alcohol content in a mug of medieval small beer was usually between 0.5% and 2.5%. That's less than the average kombucha in some modern grocery stores. It wasn't brewed for fun. It was brewed for necessity, and the low alcohol levels were intentional. Children drank it, remember? So did pregnant women, monks, priests, and farmers with plows to guide. The brewing process included boiling, which made the drink safer than water, but it also meant that much of the sugar, the fermentable part, was used up early. Less sugar, less fermentation, less alcohol, and the batches weren't made with precision instruments or consistent yeast cultures. The strength varied, but the purpose never did. Small beer was meant to quench, not to intoxicate. You shift slightly on the wall and glance over at your neighbor, who's just finished his own mug. He gives you a wave and starts loading a cart with turnips. No wobble in his step. No moaning about a pounding skull. Just another morning, business as usual. Of course, there were stronger brews too. Alewives, those fierce female brewers, might make something heartier for feast days. Monasteries brewed potent beers to sell at markets or offer to pilgrims. But those were occasions. Small beer was routine. And here's something most people forget. In a time before coffee, tea, or even consistent access to fresh fruit, small beer provided a gentle lift. The tiny amount of alcohol gave a mild buzz, not a high, just enough to smooth out the rough edges of a morning without tipping into drunkenness. You take another sip, it's cool, slightly cloudy, with a hint of sourness. Nothing fancy, but not unpleasant. In some parts of Europe, they'd flavor it with gruta, mixture of herbs like yarrow, rosemary, or sweet gale. A little herbal kick to start the day. You remember your cousin's comment last week? Beer with breakfast. You'll ruin your liver. But then again, he's from 3 villages over, and he drinks spring water. Brave man, what about overindulgence? Well, sure, some folks overdid it. There are always those who can't resist a 4th or 5th mug. But with beer this mild, getting truly drunk would require effort and intention. It wasn't something that just happened. And besides, hangovers weren't a common complaint in your village. You've never heard anyone say, "Oh, I shouldn't have had that last mug." It's more likely they'd complain about bad grain in a poorly brewed batch than the beer's effect on their head. You chuckle softly at the thought of a medieval hangover cure. What would it be? Leech therapy, cold cabbage soup, a brisk walk through the fields until you threw up. But no need, because, with small beer, there is no hangover. Just a clear mind, a steady gait, and a full day ahead. You finish your drink, place the mug beside you, and stretch your arms to the sky. The clouds are thin and high. It'll be warm later. Time to gather your tools and get to work. And as you head toward the garden, there's no fuzziness in your thoughts, no regrets from the night before. Just the quiet, simple satisfaction of starting your day like everyone else with a clear head, a calm stomach, and a belly full of barley. You sit at the edge of your little vegetable plot, a wooden rake resting beside you, and you stare into the bottom of your now empty mug. It's the same mild ale you've drunk every morning for as long as you can remember. It's comforting, familiar. But lately, you've heard whispers from the town, something about new drinks, bitter black liquids from faraway places, tea, coffee, imports carried by merchant ships and aristocratic caravans. At first, you laugh it off. Who'd want to drink boiled leaves or crushed beans when you could have beer smooth, earthy, and made from your own region's grain? But slowly, very slowly, change creeps in like morning fog. Let's rewind the scroll of time and walk through what happened in the medieval period. Early beer wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. The water in towns and cities was often polluted, especially as urban populations swelled. Rivers became latrines. Wells grew stale. A drink that required boiling, like beer, was safer than anything else. But then came sanitation. By the 17th and 18th centuries, cities across Europe began to implement proper waste disposal systems. Clean water sources piped and filtered became accessible. Suddenly, you didn't need to brew grain just to get a drink. You could trust your tap or well again. At the same time, the global trade winds were shifting. The age of exploration had brought spices, sugar, and stimulants to European ports. And nestled among these treasures were coffee beans from Arabia and Ethiopia and tea leaves from China. Both were considered exotic, energizing, and above all, modern. Where beer lulled, coffee and tea awakened. The Industrial Revolution accelerated this change. The workforce needed to be alert, punctual, and productive. Employers frowned on ale breaks and encouraged tea instead. After all, caffeine sharpens the senses. Alcohol, well, not so much. Soon, you see it even in small things. Taverns begin offering morning coffee alongside beer. Markets start stocking more imported tea, wrapped in paper with foreign script. You see a neighbor replace his breakfast ale with a steaming black mug, and he says it keeps him sharper. At first, beer holds on. It remains a symbol of the past, a slower, quieter rhythm. But with time, it fades from mornings. Not because it failed, but because the world moved too fast for it to keep up. Still, not all is lost. That cultural thread, the one tied to quiet sipping and community, stretches on. In pubs and cafes, people still gather. The mug may be porcelain, now instead of clay, but the ritual remains. You raise your drink, someone smiles, and you exchange news of the day. Even in today's modern world, some traditions remain stubborn. You've seen the recent resurgence, craft brewers resurrecting small beer recipes, touting them as gut-friendly low-alcohol alternatives. Historians uncovering monastic brewing manuals and bringing them back to life. Even the phrase liquid bread has been reborn as a marketing hook. So while early beer may no longer be your standard breakfast fare, its spirit survives in every leisurely sip taken with friends, in every pause during a bustling day, in every laugh shared over a pint. And maybe, just maybe, one morning, you'll trade your coffee for a light brew, not for a buzz, but for the quiet joy of doing something a little slower, a little older, a little wiser. You look down at the dregs in your mug. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try one of those black drinks. But for today? Today still tastes like barley and tradition. Asterisk, you wake up just before dawn. The world outside is still wrapped in a bluish-gray hush, and the faint crow of a rooster sounds like it's still clearing its throat. Today, you're going to try something different, something old. You've decided to make your own breakfast ale, using an ancient recipe reconstructed from monastery records and oral traditions. A tribute to a time when mornings were for barley, not beans. You tie on your apron and gather the ingredients: malted barley, oats, a touch of wheat. You've soaked them overnight, just as the 12th century brewers would have. There's no hops involved, that came later. Instead, you've prepared a mild blend of herbs, maybe a bit of yarrow or sweet gale, for flavor and a hint of preservation. These are known as brewed, the medieval spice mix. Before hops, muscled in, you stir the grains into your big pot of hot water. The smell rises almost immediately, earthy, nutty, warm. It's a scent not too far from oatmeal, but with something deeper, something bread-like and ancient. It smells like a field at harvest time. As the mixture simmers, you glance through the window. Sunlight is starting to stretch across the kitchen floor like a lazy cat. You imagine an Irish monk doing the same thing 1,000 years ago, except his kettle was over a fire pit, and he wore robes instead of sweats. Still, the act is the same: slow, careful, meditative. You strain the liquid into a jug and let it cool. This batch is unfermented, or only lightly so, which makes it more of a barley tea than a full beer. It's low in alcohol, barely 1 or 2%. Enough to nudge you awake, not knock you out. You pour yourself a clay cup full. The color is a cloudy gold, like sunlit straw. You lift it to your nose and breathe in a whiff of malt and herbs. Then you take a sip. It's smooth. Not sharp like modern lagers. There's no bitterness, no fizz. Instead, it's mellow, a little sweet, and with a gentle warmth that lingers on your tongue. You could see yourself drinking this while feeding the chickens, or sketching by the window, or simply staring into space without guilt. It's not just a drink, it's a pace. In that moment, you realize why this was the beverage of choice for centuries. It wasn't about getting drunk, it was about grounding, about waking up slowly, not jolting awake with a triple espresso, about letting your senses return at their own pace. You sip again, slower this time. Your body appreciates the grainy warmth. Your mind appreciates the absence of urgency. There's no rush to finish, no calendar reminder to check. Just you, the mug, and the gentle satisfaction of doing something the long way, the good way. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Breakfast beer wasn't just nutrition or sanitation or tradition. It was a ritual of presence. You take another sip and make a mental note. Next time, you'll try adding honey, Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just make this same simple brew again, because for one quiet morning, it feels like the world is yours and the monks were onto something. So, you've had your breakfast ale. You feel ... content? Maybe even a little smug? After all, you just drank the same thing a 14th century plowman might have downed before hauling rocks with his bare hands. But as the mellow warmth settles in your belly, a modern part of your brain starts to whisper, was this actually good? For me? Well, that's where things get interesting and a little blurry. Let's start with the obvious. Medieval beer, especially morning ale, had very low alcohol content, 1 to 2% at most. It wasn't meant to intoxicate, it was meant to hydrate. And here's the thing, compared to most available water at the time, it was probably safer. Brewing killed off bacteria, milk spoiled, water carried disease, beer, it stayed drinkable for days. So in a world before sterilization, it was kind of the MVP of liquids. Now let's talk about nutrition. Barley and wheat weren't just carbs, they came with B vitamins, iron, and a decent chunk of calories. Some historical reconstructions suggest a full tankard of medieval ale could have as much as 150 to 200 calories. That's breakfast and hydration in one rustic ceramic mug. Not bad, considering multivitamins didn't exist yet. But there are caveats. Modern nutritionists, of course, raise eyebrows. First off, medieval ale had very little protein or fiber, and the vitamin content was wildly inconsistent depending on the grain used, the season, the brewer, and the weather. Also, most medieval people were drinking several pints a day, not just a little mug, with their porridge. If you replaced every glass of water with beer today, even low-alcohol beer, your doctor would definitely have words. Still, it's not just about vitamins and minerals, is it? Let's look at this a different way. What did breakfast beer replace? In the early Middle Ages, there were no smoothies, no cold brews with oat milk. A monk's morning might start with a slice of bread and a sip of ale. A peasant woman might brew a batch in the same pot she used for porridge. In this context, beer wasn't a treat or a vice. It was just ... breakfast. The same way we now down sugary cereals or double-shot lattes without blinking. And while modern diets are richer and safer, they're also faster, noisier, and a little bit chaotic. Here's where historians and nutritionists surprisingly agree. Breakfast beer wasn't healthy by today's clinical standards, but it was part of a slower rhythm, one that let people ease into their day. No blaring alarms, number 10-minute coffee runs, no inbox anxiety, just a slow sip of warm grain tea. Maybe while listening to birds or the blacksmith hammering away down the lane. It's that sense of gentleness, of presence, that we've lost. And it's maybe what we're craving, not the beer itself, but the space it created. In a way, the real benefit wasn't in the barley, it was in the pause. And maybe, just maybe, that's healthier than any superfood smoothie. You stretch, set your clay mug down, and smile. Not because you're healthier now, but because you feel more human. And really, what better way is there to start the day? You're back in the present now. No grain mash simmering on the hearth, no wooden bench under you, no monk humming from the cloister next door. Just your space, dimly lit, and the faint hum of the modern world beyond your headphones. Maybe you're not about to brew your own barley ale or swap your morning latte for fermented oats, but something stayed with you tonight, a texture, a rhythm, a kind of soft simplicity that echoes from a time when mornings didn't begin with inboxes, but with warmth and grain and quiet. You're not meant to remember every fact, every date. This story, like all good bedtime tales, wasn't about that. It was about walking you slowly through another world, one slow sip at a time. So take a breath, let the light stay low, and when you do finally fall asleep, maybe you'll dream of cobbled courtyards, steaming clay mugs, and the kind of sunrise that stretches across a field of golden barley. sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time.